In 1994, the quiet town of Raven Creek was shaken when Emily Harker, a 23-year-old criminology student, was found dead on a forest trail, her missing notebook page becoming the central mystery. Decades earlier, Margaret Klein, a 19-year-old local girl, had vanished from the same woods without a trace. The case grew darker with accounts from Jacob Mills, a hunter who saw a shadowy man in a dark coat, and Clara Jensen, a resident who noticed strange headlights near the trail that night. Emily's younger brother, Daniel Harker, has spent his life chasing justice, yet the truth remains buried in silence. The town of Raven Creek had always been a place where people felt safe, a lakeside community wrapped in quiet forests and misty mornings. It was the kind of town where children rode their bikes without worry, where neighbors waved from porches, and where the most exciting news might be a new family moving in. But in the autumn of 1994, that calm was shattered in a way no one could have imagined. On a cold October morning, the body of a young woman was discovered on a forest path just outside town, her presence there as unnatural as the frost that coated the fallen leaves. The victim was quickly identified as Emily Harker, a 23-year-old university student who had returned home for a short visit. Her death would become the darkest moment in Raven Creek's history, a crime that would forever alter the town's identity. The forest trail where Emily was found was a familiar place, a winding path that stretched behind the cottages near the lake, a space that locals had always considered peaceful. Families walked there with their children, hikers took in the silence of the pines, and hunters used it as a route deeper into the woods. Yet on that morning, everything about the trail felt wrong. Emily's body lay in plain sight, as if it had been deliberately placed there. There were no signs of struggle around her, no scattered belongings, no evidence of a chase. Her car was parked neatly by the trail entrance, the keys still in her pocket, as though she had stepped out for a walk and simply never returned. The first responders who arrived at the scene were unsettled, not just by the discovery, but by the absence of clues. There was no blood on the ground, no obvious wounds, and no weapon nearby. The damp earth should have revealed tracks from whoever had been there last, but it looked nearly undisturbed, as if the forest itself had hidden what had happened. The investigators could only mark the spot and collect what little evidence there was, though it seemed almost nothing could point them in the direction of the truth. What made the case even more chilling was the timing. Emily had been seen the evening before by a friend at a cafe in town, smiling and chatting about her studies. She had mentioned going for a walk later that night, something she often did when visiting her family's cottage. It was part of her routine, a way to clear her mind before writing in her notebook. When she failed to return home, her parents assumed she had stayed late with friends. By morning, her absence was undeniable, and a neighbor stumbled upon the body while walking his dog. The discovery was immediate, shocking, and impossible to explain. From that day on, Raven Creek was never the same. A place that had once thrived on its sense of trust now carried an invisible weight. The trail that had been safe became a forbidden stretch of land, a reminder that someone had taken a life there, and that whoever had done it had left no trace at all. Emily Harker's life was the kind that seemed destined for promise. She had grown up in Raven Creek, the eldest daughter of a schoolteacher and a nurse, and from a young age she carried the kind of determination that made her stand out. While her peers dreamed of leaving the town for excitement, Emily dreamed of studying the human mind, fascinated by what led people to commit acts of good and evil. That passion eventually carried her to Toronto, where she enrolled in a criminology program at the university. She was a strong student, known by professors for her persistence and by classmates for her quiet kindness. Coming home for the autumn break was supposed to be a pause from her demanding schedule, a time to breathe the cold air of the lake and reconnect with the comfort of family. Her return to Raven Creek was warmly welcomed. Friends noticed how refreshed she seemed, though they also observed a seriousness in her demeanor. She carried her notebook everywhere, jotting down ideas and observations as though her mind never stopped working. Locals often saw her sitting near the docks or along the trails, writing while the leaves around her shifted from green to gold. That notebook, filled with half-finished thoughts and sketches, would later become one of the central mysteries of the investigation. On the evening of her disappearance, Emily had spent time at a small cafe in town, sipping tea and chatting with an old classmate. She laughed easily, But there was a moment when she looked toward the window and seemed distracted. She mentioned plans to take her usual walk later, saying the forest always gave her clarity. The forest was familiar ground for her, a place where she felt safe. She parked her car at the trailhead, locked the doors, and set out into the trees. The moonlight was faint, filtered by the branches, and the chill of October was already settling over the ground. She carried no flashlight, just her notebook, a pen, and her thoughts. When investigators examined her belongings the next morning, they noticed that everything was accounted for except a single page torn from the notebook. Every other sheet remained intact, her handwriting neat and consistent, filled with reflections on her studies and small fragments of personal musings. The missing page was unsettling. It was not unusual for Emily to tear out a sheet now and then, but the fact that it was gone on the night she vanished raised questions. Was it taken by someone else? Did it hold something she had written just before her final moments? That gap in her journal became a symbol of the unanswered questions that surrounded her death. Friends and family could not understand how someone so careful could have walked directly into danger. Emily had always been cautious, never reckless, and she was familiar with the woods. The absence of any clear cause of death made her story even harder to accept. To those who loved her, it felt as though her life had been cut short not by chance but by someone's deliberate actions. What frightened Raven Creek most was the possibility that the person responsible was still among them, moving through the same streets where Emily once walked, holding the secret of that missing page and the truth of what really happened in the forest. As the days passed after Emily's death, suspicion began to settle over Raven Creek like a heavy fog. The town that once thrived on neighborly trust now looked inward with doubt, each resident wondering if the killer lived among them. The police combed through Emily's life, searching for enemies, grudges, or anyone who might have wanted to harm her. But she had lived with such kindness that no obvious suspect appeared. The absence of evidence was haunting. Without fingerprints, without a weapon, and without a cause of death, the investigators were left with only shadows to chase. It was then that whispers about Raven Creek's darker past began to surface, tying Emily's death to something the town had never fully confronted. In the 1970s, a young woman named Margaret Klein had disappeared from the same forest where Emily's body was later found. Margaret had been 19, a local who loved hiking, and one October evening she vanished without a trace. Despite search parties, helicopters, and police dogs, not a single clue had ever been found. Many in Raven Creek believed her story had faded into the town's folklore, a cautionary tale mothers told their children. But when Emily was discovered decades later, the memory of Margaret's disappearance returned with chilling force. The similarities were too striking to ignore. Both were young women, both were last seen near the trail, and both cases unfolded in the same season when the leaves fell thick on the forest floor. The idea of a hidden predator in Raven Creek quickly spread, though no one could say who it might be. Some speculated that Margaret and Emily's deaths were connected, the work of a killer who had hidden in plain sight for decades, blending seamlessly into the life of the community. Others thought the resemblance was coincidental, but the fear was enough to fracture the calm of the town. Parents forbade their children from walking near the woods. Hunters and hikers avoided the trail altogether. Even those who scoffed at the rumors walked a little faster at night, glancing over their shoulders when footsteps echoed too close. Investigators tried to narrow their focus to people who had been near the forest on the night Emily died. They questioned old classmates, neighbors, and even passing travelers, but every story seemed incomplete. Then, details began to emerge about Emily's last weeks at home. Friends revealed she had mentioned feeling uneasy during her walks. She had spoken casually of hearing branches snapping behind her, of sensing someone's presence just out of sight. Some dismissed it as nerves, but others remembered her tone as serious, even unsettled. Those statements painted a troubling picture. Emily might have known she was being watched long before her final night. Despite their efforts, authorities could not find anyone who admitted to seeing a suspicious figure near the trail. The closest lead came from a shopkeeper who claimed Emily had been visiting his store more often, buying notebooks and pens, yet leaving hurriedly, as if she didn't want to linger. Nothing about her actions seemed alarming on the surface, but when combined with her words about being followed, it suggested something had changed in her routine. Perhaps she was aware of someone's presence. Perhaps she had written about it in the missing page, or perhaps it was all coincidence. The uncertainty made the case unbearable for those who followed it, and the silence of the forest only deepened the sense that answers were deliberately hidden. As months slipped by with no arrest, frustration grew inside the Raven Creek investigation. Detectives struggled to hold the public's confidence as each new lead collapsed into silence. At first, there was hope when a partial footprint was found near the trail where Emily's body had been discovered. It was pressed into the damp soil, larger than her shoe size and facing away from the path. Yet, before forensic experts could cast it properly, heavy rain swept through the forest and washed most of the details away. What could have been the first solid clue dissolved into nothing more than speculation. It was a cruel reminder of how fragile evidence could be in the elements, and how fate itself seemed to fight against uncovering the truth. In the weeks that followed, tips trickled in from across the community. A hunter swore he had seen a man in a long dark coat moving through the woods the same night Emily vanished. He described the figure as tall and broad, but the distance and fading light blurred every detail. Another resident claimed she noticed headlights near the trail after midnight, though she couldn't identify the vehicle. Each account was vague, lacking the certainty needed to build a case. Investigators pursued them all, yet no names, no connections, and no tangible proof emerged. The picture remained blurry, like a puzzle with too many missing pieces. The one discovery that reignited interest came nearly a year later. A fisherman casting lines on the far edge of Raven Lake spotted something floating near the reeds. At first he thought it was trash, but when he pulled it from the water, he found a plastic bag sealed tightly with tape. Inside was a single sheet of paper, waterlogged yet still readable in parts. Forensic teams confirmed it was from Emily's missing notebook, the very page that had never been recovered from the night she disappeared. The words, though smudged, revealed a half-written sentence. It began with her familiar handwriting but cut off abruptly, mid-thought as though interrupted. No further pages were inside the bag, and the source of the discovery raised more questions than answers. Had someone deliberately placed it there to be found, or had it been hidden and later carried by the current? The page quickly became the centerpiece of theories surrounding her case. Some believed it was proof Emily had encountered someone in the forest, perhaps even started writing about it, only to be stopped before she could finish. Others doubted its significance, suggesting it was torn out earlier for unrelated reasons and only later disposed of. What unsettled everyone was the deliberate nature of the bag's sealing. It suggested intention, the hand of someone who wanted the page concealed or revealed on their own terms. Despite renewed hope, the discovery failed to move the investigation forward. No fingerprints were found on the bag, and the ink could not be analyzed beyond confirming it was hers. Theories continued to swirl, but the trail was colder than ever. Each lead that surfaced ended in a dead end, and the unanswered question of what Emily had begun to write remained the most haunting element of all. For many in Raven Creek, the page was not just a clue but a taunt, as if the truth was always just beyond reach, waiting to be uncovered yet never fully seen. Time has a way of dulling most tragedies, but in Raven Creek, the memory of Emily Harker's death never softened. The decades that followed turned her story into a shadow that clung to every corner of the town. Children who were born long after 1994 grew up hearing warnings not to wander near the forest trails. Tourists who came to enjoy the lake sensed the unease in the air, an unspoken heaviness that residents rarely explained. To outsiders, Raven Creek was a charming place surrounded by beauty. To those who lived there, it was a place marked by an unsolved mystery that refused to fade. The investigation officially remained open, yet it became clear with each passing year that answers might never come. Detectives retired, files were boxed away, and new crimes in other regions took priority. Still, Emily's case continued to resurface in whispers. Amateur sleuths studied it endlessly, poring over every detail that had been released, building theories that stretched from the logical to the bizarre. Some pointed to the similarities between Emily's death and Margaret Klein's disappearance decades earlier, convinced both were linked by a hidden hand. Others believed Emily had stumbled onto something, perhaps knowledge she should not have had, and paid the price for it. The missing notebook page became the centerpiece of every discussion, a symbol of a truth lost to time. Within Raven Creek itself, suspicion never fully left. Longtime residents sometimes spoke of neighbors they never trusted, individuals who were too quiet, too evasive, or who left town suddenly after Emily's murder. Names circulated but never held weight. The hunter who claimed to see the man in the dark coat remained haunted by his own uncertainty, never sure if what he had glimpsed was connected or merely coincidence. The woman who mentioned the headlights near the trail wondered for years if she could have done more to help identify the vehicle. Both lived with a lingering guilt that perhaps they had witnessed the beginning or the end of something terrible without realizing its importance. For Emily's family, the pain was endless. Her parents eventually moved away from Raven Creek, unable to bear the constant reminders. Her younger brother, who was just a teenager at the time, grew into adulthood with the case shaping every chapter of his life. He pushed for answers, giving interviews and working with advocacy groups for cold cases, but even his efforts could not pry loose new information. The silence around Emily's death was impenetrable, as if the forest itself had swallowed the truth along with her last moments. Today, visitors to the town sometimes find their way to the old trail, now overgrown with weeds and fallen branches. Locals avoid it, but outsiders, drawn by curiosity, walk the path slowly as though expecting to feel the presence of what happened there. The air carries an unnatural stillness, the kind that makes people whisper even when alone. Raven Creek has learned to live with its secret, but the story of Emily Harker remains a wound that never healed. The absence of justice has become part of its identity, a reminder that some mysteries are never solved and some killers never unmasked. For many, that is the most terrifying truth of all. In the quiet lakeside town of Raven Creek, safety was once a certainty, until 23-year-old Emily Harker was found dead on a forest trail in 1994. Her case, eerily similar to the 1970s disappearance of Margaret Klein, left investigators baffled and residents terrified. Witnesses like the hunter who saw a man in a dark coat and the woman who noticed late-night headlights gave fragments of a puzzle that never fit. Emily's grieving family, including her devoted younger brother, searched for answers that never came. Decades later, the missing notebook page and the silence of the woods still haunt Raven Creek.